All right. Hello and welcome everyone to another PM Square live stream. I'm Ryan Dolley, your host today, Vice President of Technology at PM Square, and we have what I think is one of the coolest, most useful live streams that we've done in a long time here today, which is all about deploying Cognos Analytics on Amazon Web Services. This is something that we've been really hard at work ironing out, putting together a kind of an overview of why to do this, the best practices on doing it, really showing you. We're going to show you live what you can get out of it, really dive deep into AWS to show you how we configure Cognos on the platform, how we deploy Cognos on the platform. Some really, really exciting stuff we have to show today. I'm going to be joined by my colleague, Chris Chapman, in just a bit. While we're waiting on that, just want to, give a shout out to everybody. Azraq, happy Thursday. Yeah, good to see you here. Looking forward to interacting with you guys. So one thing about this is, a lot of our live streams that we do are really, really all about, it's very Cognos centric, and this is Cognos centric too, but there's a lot of, charts and graphs, and I'm building dashboards and stuff like that. Today's going to be a little technical, and that's why we invited Chris on. Chris is our primary AWS architect here at PM Square and kind of the master of what you're going to see today. So this is one of those ones where I take a back seat and I let a real expert come in and walk us through what we're going to be doing. And Chris is that expert. So I'm really happy to be joined by Chris Chapman here today. Chris, can you hear me?
I can, Ryan. Hello.
Hello. All right. Great to have you here today. So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? Give us a little introduction.
Sure. So I've been an architect within Cognos for almost 10 years now. Wore a number of hats outside of architect, admin, report dev. So spent a lot of time thinking about deploying Cognos, improving Cognos installations, and just working with Cognos very hands-on, whether it's report, dashboard development. And recently, last few years, there's been a focus on AWS. Here at PM Square, we are AWS partners, and we were deploying more of our internal tools and products and applications on AWS, but then also seeing that clients are needing more help in AWS. So I pivoted to being a certified solution architect for AWS as well to help kind of merge and blend those two worlds together.
Awesome. And can you tell us, what was that transition like? Because I'm a Cognos guy, and I'll be the first to admit that some of the stuff that you do on AWS just seems like magic to me. So what was it like to kind of go from, Cognos architect to then branching into AWS, which is not really a piece of software. It's like a huge platform.
Yeah, it can be a little overwhelming at first. So it was actually a bit like going back home. For me, though, my degree was in information systems. So the networking side, infrastructure side, something I'd obviously trained for in college and had a great deal of exposure with. So there was familiarity there. I'm also naturally just curious, and I like new things, especially in tech, like new shiny things, problem solving, stitching things together. So for me, there was a lot. When you look in the breadth of AWS, all the different tools and services that they have, there is a lot there. So it is hard to kind of figure out where to start. But once you get in, you work your way, you become more familiar with it. I mean, if anyone is interested, the advice that I would give is start small, start very scoped. You have a particular project that you want to tackle, particular use case. Start with that. Just deploying something on EC2, for example. Learn there and then expand out as you get more and more comfortable with all the services and offerings.
Yeah, great. I think that's good advice, because I look at it and this is a road that I'm also going down. Probably not looking to become a AWS architect like you, but these are skills, cloud skills, familiarity with the major cloud platforms that I think are rapidly becoming something that is maybe you don't have to have, but a huge bonus to have in your toolkit, even if you're focused on a particular piece of software like Cognos. As we see, yes, there's Cognos deployed on-prem and IBM's cloud with the IBM SaaS product, but a lot of people are choosing to move their infrastructure to AWS or GCP or Azure, and just understanding what that means, what challenges you're going to face, but also what opportunities exist in the context of something like Cognos is a big benefit. So, I'm following up behind you, and I can attest to that being good advice. Starting small, right? I mean, I'm at the phase where I'm learning like what is an S3 bucket and how do you secure an S3 bucket and that sort of stuff. And I think, speaking from experience, starting there, it seems like really can be a bridge to a whole world, and that's something that you've done.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Well, let's dive into today's topic, which is really about deploying Cognos on Amazon Web Services. So the first question that we're going to get, and I don't get this as much as I used to when I would talk about this with customers, but a big one is, I think because a lot of people really have embraced the move to the major cloud vendors in the last 2 or 3 years. But first of all, why? Like I have Cognos on-prem. It's working fine on-prem. Why should I consider moving it to Amazon Web Services?
Sure. Yeah, so you can see the bulleted list here that we'll go through. Right off the bat, there's time savings. Everyone wants to make their life easier. No one has enough time for anything these days. So you want to try to get some of that back. The tools and services, and then we're going to talk about this quite a bit, services that you can put around Cognos. Not just the core Cognos itself, but the supporting services around Cognos that are within a provider like AWS can help alleviate some of the administrative work you may have had to do in the past, whether it's signing firewalls, creating networking, anything like that. That can be automated to help take some of that burden off of your team. Another one would be cost savings. Everyone also trying to save and cut money. So this can be done in a number of ways. Cost savings is a multi-pronged approach. One of the easiest ways you can do it right off the bat is being able to schedule instances or servers to start and stop. So if you have a dev team that doesn't need, isn't going to be doing development at night, you can spin those servers down at night, so you're not having to pay for those costs. Additionally, just in moving to the cloud, one of the things is reorienting any thinking, because traditionally, you're on-prem, you've bought this server, you lease it for 3 years, 5 years. It's this fixed cost, real physical asset that you have. So you want to maximize your value out of it, right? You want to make sure it's highly utilized, that you're always using it. And then if you're not, it's just a sunk cost that's just sitting there. And with the cloud, these are disposable resources. You spin a server up, you want to test 11.2 just to play with it. You spin up for a day, for a week. When you're done with it, you terminate it, it's gone. And you're not having to pay for that cost anymore. So it's a very big benefit of treating those resources not as disposable to save some cost. Another one is increase application resiliency and uptime. You're single on-prem, or when you're looking at our on-prem architecture, if you're looking to have a robust disaster recovery, robust failover, it could be really hard because you have to first deploy to one data center to be follow best practice, to be truly resilient and have a lot of uptime. You have to go contract out to another data center, deploy there, stand up another environment. It's a lot of work, a lot of effort. See some people I know, some companies we're worked with, they technically have another environment, but they don't really keep it up to date. It's kind of there and they can jump to it if they need to. Here we can do this again programmatically. It can be integrated with your core infrastructure, your core architecture, so that the DR is just part of your design. It's not a secondary process you're having to think about. Going back also to some of the concepts around the cost savings is repeatable, predictable installations and upgrades. So no longer having to go through the process of sitting down, downloading the zips to the server, running the install, typing in all the configuration, running tests, checking everything is out good, troubleshooting. One of the great benefits of the cloud is being able to script out almost all of this, really all of these kinds of deployments. And this is going to be a key focus of what we'll look at today. Being able to have a script that will not just install and configure Cognos for you, but provision the server, provision a load balancer if it's needed, apply security groups, ingress and egress rules for those security groups, everything that you would, all the infrastructure and supporting elements around that environment you would need can be created. But the key here is then you can reuse that and use it every single time. So you're not having to guess, you're not having to figure out, why can't I reach my database server today? Because you've got a driver, you didn't open a port. We've all done that. I've done that many times. It's very frustrating to forget that one little thing, but this will allow you to be more nimble at doing more frequent upgrades or deployments of new versions, and just offload you to do more important things if you just don't have to sit there and just install Cognos for 2 or 3 days. And then this last one is one we're seeing more and more. You're being forced to, depending on your organizational structure. If IT is just a part of, if the BI team is just simply a part of the IT department, it may just be being forced that everyone's moving to a cloud provider. So get on board and figure out how to move your application. Yeah. So those are the most common reasons we see people wanting to move.
Yeah, so let me ask you a few questions about that. That's pretty interesting. So one that comes up a lot when I'm talking with clients has to do with cost savings and more specifically, there's this idea that when you move to the cloud, one of the things you're going to get is auto scaling or load-based scaling, and that that is just viewed as a component of the cloud and one of the advantages to going there. And while that is a component of the cloud, I'm curious if you can talk to us a little bit about, well, what does that mean in the context of Cognos as it exists today?
Mm-hmm. Sure. Yeah, we've gotten this question a few times myself as well. So in auto scaling, the general concept is there is an event that will trigger an automatic provisioning of more servers. So the event is typically tied to, you think about like resource utilization for the existing servers that are spun up. So if your 2 servers are running at 80% capacity for 5 minutes, it'll trigger an event that will provision more servers. Typically auto scaling is, and that's typically what people think about. So it's a very instantaneous sort of event. And once that trigger is set, those new servers are there. Typically those servers are running some kind of a microservice that can be initiated very, very quickly. I'm sure you probably see where this is going. Cognos is not a microservice.
Yeah.
Not close. So it makes it a challenge. As internal testing of what we've done, we've tried to do auto scaling. I've got it down to just about 5 minutes for a server to be provisioned startup, which is actually pretty good.
Yeah.
But when you think about it in the context of a load event within Cognos, right? A number of users log on, running really complicated reports. So you have one report that's out of control and it's consumed an entire dispatcher. You need to bring something else to offload the load. And in most instances, by the time that new dispatcher could be brought up, the event is over. It's too late. 5 minutes is too long. So can you do it? Yes. It just, you need to understand what the SLA would be like for that kind of a spin up to occur.
Yeah.
Now, it doesn't mean to say that you can't do other things to scale up and scale down to both increase your capacity and maximize your cost savings. So one of the things you can do is schedule instances to start and stop. So imagine bringing up 6 dispatchers, but you really only need 2 or 3 through normal operating hours, but you have peak periods where you may need to get up to 5 or the full 6. You can schedule those to start and stop. so that you can bring those up and down. 30 minutes before that peak time will occur, and maybe an hour after the peak time will end. You can also then piggyback off of um, pricing models that allow you to purchase what's called a reserved instance. So you just pay up front. You can also do a scheduled reserved, where you can pay for those instances to only run during those hours that you specify. For further cost savings. So really maximize their when resources are going to be running, and then how you're paying for them to, like I said, maximize the the, uh, the load you're able to take while minimizing your cost.
It's funny, Chris. This is a really timely conversation because just this morning I was talking to one of our clients who told me that one of that Cognos is used really heavily in their Office of Finance, and that one of the complaints the Office of Finance has is that there's these key reports for month-end close, and if you run one of the reports, say on the 15th of the month outside of the month-end close window, it runs in seven seconds. But if you run it on the first of the month, it takes 2 hours for that same report to execute. So that, I think that's a perfect example of a combination of kind of calendar-based scaling, where like we have a heavy load period, and then maybe this load-based scaling as like the cherry on top for periods. There are periods where, hey, if we could get a new application server spun up, yeah, even if it takes 5 minutes, like that is really going to help us out a lot,
Mm-hmm.
So I think those two things combined, it seems to me, work together really well to enable you to really lower costs, because your baseline for Cognos in a lot of environments is pretty low compared to those burst periods, and being able to scale along with that is a huge advantage. Let me ask you one more question before we move on, and that has to do with another conversation I've been having a lot recently, which is about customers who are interested in trying to keep up with the upgrade cycle of Cognos, where granted we just had a 10-month period between updates or new releases, but now that we're on 11.2, the new release cadence should be settling back into the every 3 to 4 months we're getting a new release. Can moving to AWS help with that? Like, because a lot of customers are finding that challenging to keep up with when maybe they're used to more of a Cognos 10 philosophy where there's really one version a year.
Sure. Yeah. Speaking with Cognos clients as well, people are wanting to stay up to date, but it's hard. And I think a lot of the reason it's hard is what we talked about previously with the installation and just provisioning, and especially if you're on-prem. If you want to test this new version, well, if you don't have a sandbox, well, you have to find a server. Once that gets provisioned, which maybe take a few days, well, then it has to get set up and configured. Then there's a whole process of just prepping Windows, right? You need to set all your firewall rules, because we know all the steps that we need to go through, get all this software on there. So you can be a week, someone taking a week just to get this up and running, and just so you can see, will this new version break anything we have, or do we just want to play out with the new dashboard tools? But with some of the techniques we're going to see today, that repeatable and predictable step is the key. Being able to take a more DevOps approach to your Cognos installs, to script that out, so that when you want a new version, you can drop it out into an S3 bucket that we'll see, and then just run your script and provision yourself a new server, and you can, in maybe 20-30 minutes, you're ready to go. And that's 20-30 minutes where no one was doing anything. The AWS services were in the background performing the work for you. Once it's done, you're just able to jump in and take advantage of whatever you need to do with that new version. So yes, I would say absolutely it can 100% facilitate with this. Also, we've seen certain clients or certain instances where we see things like over the top installs can be problematic. This also eliminates that. Right?
Yeah.
You're not building up technical debt within all these servers that may be running for 3-5 years, and one day it's just like, does this work? It's weird. Like, why is this? Why are we eating all this memory? Why? It's just weird. Is the only way to describe it. You really just need a fresh server, and this would allow you to to make sure you're always on a clean slate, and don't get any of the weirdness of long running servers.
No, we've all run into that, right? Where suddenly things are just weird, right? Like that's the
Yeah,
term of art, right? This is weird.
yeah.
And it's like, well, actually, the server's been up for 3 straight years with no downtime, and
Hmm.
and that's really, and what I'm really excited to share with everybody today, and what we're going to dive into in a second, is exactly how we do this, right? And we've done a lot of work to make it happen. But the thing that was kind of mind blowing for me was, when Chris showed me, like, yeah, I can spin up an environment, a really complex environment in less than an hour, just by filling out, using kind of the templates that we have in place and all that sort of thing, just providing some basic information to AWS and letting AWS take it from there. Before we move on, I do have one question from chat. And the question is, so, are we talking about spinning up additional dispatchers, or are we talking about scaling up, individual dispatchers, maybe from one EC2 instance type to a
Mm,
higher instance type?
sure, great question. Before we were talking about spinning up new dispatchers, you can. So the two concepts are scale out, which is what we were discussing, which would be applying or would be provisioning additional dispatchers. A scale up event would be increasing the size or capacity of an existing dispatcher. So we were talking in the context of scaling out. You can scale up. Caveats there, you can't do it with a live instance. So you'd have to spin that dispatcher down before you would scale up. So wouldn't be applicable for, again, for an acute event. But if also one of the good things about the cloud, and as you're going, one of the questions we do often get is, well, what does the architecture look like? And I have a blog post out there I think we're going to share. It's in the link, kind of discussing this, some of the top questions that we get. And this is one of them. What should the architecture look like? And it's hard to know. Sometimes most likely you internally and gut feeling know what it will look like. One of the ways is you can move the existing architecture if you're unsure what sizing all the servers need to be, but you can do that. Scale up the server as you need to, scale down. If you deploy in 3 months, you're like, wow, we're only using 20% of the capacity. You can scale it down, save yourself some money. So yes, that would be. You can definitely take both approaches depending on where you are and what you're seeing in your environment.
Great. Well, why don't we kind of walk through the architecture of what we're looking at, and
Mhm.
then dive into AWS and actually show you guys exactly how we do this. The one thing we want to make sure we do here, so 2 things. Of course, we want to be mindful of everybody's time, so we'll try to make sure we get through the slides quickly. We know you guys don't come to PM Square live streams to look at slides, right? That's what makes us different from the webinars you normally attend. And then 2, as we go through, I'm watching chat. So as Chris is going through, if you have a question, get it into that chat and I'll make sure he answers it. This is your opportunity to talk to, I mean, I don't want to, I don't want to embarrass you here, Chris, but like who I think is probably among the, or maybe the world expert in these automated Cognos deployments and scaling events on AWS. So this is your chance to get those questions answered. Let's get them in there, guys. With that said, Chris, take it away. Let's walk through some architecture.
Sure. So just a quick overview of the services that we're going to see today for anyone that isn't as familiar with AWS. We're the primary services here that we're going to be talking about and that are used in this particular deployment is EC2, Elastic Compute, which just being able to provision servers on AWS. Amazon Machine Image, so that's part of EC2. An Amazon Machine Image is just a snapshot that you can create that will have pre-installed software on that. So in this case, what we've done is spun up instances and then installed the Cognos components that we need. For the gateways, we just installed Gateway IIS. For the single server, we just did a plain single server install. But it allows you so you don't have to rerun the Cognos installer every time, and then you can reuse it, especially multi-environment deployment. You can install a dispatcher once and then just reuse that across all your environments, and regardless how many dispatchers you have. So machine images is another. S3, this is an object store within AWS. Most likely, you won't even know, a lot of some of the biggest companies' websites run on S3. I know Amazon, their internal data lake is all based in S3. It's really one of the backbones of AWS, and this is where we're housing a lot of the repositories of the Cognos files, whether it's Cog Startup, some of the other template scripts that we're using, we're housing it there to reference later. Another one, CloudFormation. So this is a tool within AWS that allows you to programmatically provision resources within AWS. Just by executing API calls, you can do things like create EC2 instances, create DNS entries in Route 53, which the next one, Route 53, that's just their hosted DNS service, where you're able to host a domain and then create DNS entries within that. But this is where we're going to be taking a deep dive in the CloudFormation, how that works, how this can orchestrate a lot of that resource creation. To a lesser extent, IAM. So this is their identity and access management, providing either yourself or services, partners like CloudFormation, giving it the permissions within your account to create and provision resources that it needs to access certain resources, like from S3, for example. And then just the other technologies that we're using, this will be all deployed in Windows, although a lot of the techniques definitely would apply if you're a Linux shop and would like to deploy in Linux. And then we're using PowerShell and IIS, because again, this is a Windows install. So we're going to be diving into PowerShell as the tool that we use to do a lot of the configuration of Cognos once the instances are deployed. So yeah, we're going to take a look at the example architecture. So we're going to look at a few different installs today. One is going to be a simple server install, just so you can see in real time how CloudFormation can work to actually create and spin up the environment. But we already have one created that we spun up, and this is an example of what that architecture looks like. So it's going to be slightly bigger than the single server install, clearly, but in this case, we're using a load balancer. It's being routed to 2 gateways. We have 2 dispatchers, and then 2 content managers, one primary, one standby. We're going to an RDS, so it's their hosted database service within AWS, and that's housing our content store, audit store, and notification store. So this is pretty typical architecture. I'm sure many of you are familiar with this, or at least seeing examples like this. So what we're doing here isn't exactly revolutionary from this point of view. I mentioned earlier about being able to surround this core architecture with the supporting AWS services that we mentioned above to help do things like cut costs, save you time. So that's where we're going to jump into next and see how those AWS specific services can overlay to provide us some of the additional benefit. So there's a little more going on in this one, but we'll try to do a quick walkthrough so we can see what this looks like. So in the first part, users are being routed to Route 53. Now, important to note, you don't have to host your DNS provider doesn't need to be in Route 53. We're using in this case, but if you do have an external, that can be used as well. Just little extra steps, like we mentioned before. If you do have your domain hosted in Route 53, you can do things like programmatically create DNS entries. So if you spin up a new Cognos install, like Cognos 11.2.company.com, you can create that DNS entry on the fly. So it provides you a little more flexibility, but again, not a roadblock if that's not needed. So in this case, users that log in will be routed to Route 53. We then have a DNS entry here that is pointing to our load balancers. And the load balancers are in multi-AZ, AZ. So see here we have availability zone A and B. So within AWS, an AZ is simply a data center, group of data centers that are close together within a particular region. So within each region, you'll have typically three or more availability zones, and you can just think of these as data centers. And when we mentioned earlier about being able to incorporate disaster recovery and failover directly into your architecture, this is what we were referring to is doing a multi-AZ deployment. So deploying deploying Cognos across multiple AZs, so that if you do have failover, or if an availability zone goes out. I mean, I think it was last fall, there was an entire region in AWS went out, and like Reddit and all these big websites went down. Which a region goes out, that's quite a big deal. But AZs can go out. It's rare, but they can go offline. But that's what gives you the resiliency, because if you're, and we're going to be able to see this in real time later, is if you do lose a whole AZ, if you're deployed across multiple, you'll have failover, you'll have automatic failover and balance there to keep the application online. And do want to call it again, this is still that same architecture we saw before, just with more layered on it. So even if some of the terminology is a little different, even if you think that that's too much or just a lot going on, it's really the core architecture, and we're just layering on top things to make our lives easier. Because once the user then logs in through the load balancer, then gets routed whichever way it goes to either the gateways and the dispatchers, it flows more or less the same as it would with an on-prem environment. Interacts with the content store and audit, queries data, and then whatever data stores are available. And so none of that will be changing. Now, we mentioned a lot about the repeatability of the deployments, saving time. That step is happening here at the top within CloudFormation, the S3 and AMIs. So we mentioned there about those being some of the core technologies that we'll be using to facilitate that. And that's what this looks like here. But this really doesn't tell the full picture. I want to do a quick zoom in to see what this looks like. So we want to zoom in on just that piece. It's going to be a little hard to really see. There's a lot in play when you start kicking off some of these CloudFormation templates. It's there are a number of moving parts, but they're not necessarily that complicated. There's a few core areas that you need to be mindful of and just understand where everything is and where it's coming from. So we have two S3 buckets, which is just just big folder in S3 where you can house either other folders or files. Within these buckets, we have one that stores the CloudFormation templates so that we can reference those and reuse those. Then we have another one that's hosting the Cognos install files. So this can be like our PowerShell scripts that will perform the install and configuration of Cognos, any drivers and files you need, DLLs, SQL Server drivers, and then even images, report images. Keeping those out on S3 and just pull those down. And again, I've dropped a lot of images and incorrect folders over the years.
Yeah.
I wonder why their reports aren't displaying them. Being able to programmatically define that so everything gets to where it needs to be every single time, you're not having to troubleshoot and figure out why why it's not working.
So Chris, when you use CloudFormation for this, is what you're saying like things like putting drivers in the drivers folder on each application server and putting images in the right folder in the Cognos install, Amazon can take care of all of that for you?
Yeah, so there's a couple different layers to this. There's the CloudFormation templates, which, we'll see this when we click off CloudFormation and we execute one of the templates. It's really going to, for the technical term, mush all this together, right? It's going to combine this and execute the full script, because there's really two layers of what's happening here. We have CloudFormation templates that are provisioning the AWS specific resources. So your security groups, DNS, EC2 instances. But then hanging off those are some of the custom scripts that we've created in PowerShell that will actually do the configuration of Cognos, but will also do things like download the files from S3 and then place those to where they need to go. So there's a few different layers to the scripting that's happening. We'll see why that is and how that is. But CloudFormation is the engine that will facilitate that and drive this home. Because once it starts running, it will pass this, these scripts and this information off to the AMIs. The AMIs will then be deployed into whatever VPC or subnet that you had previously defined.
Cool. Yeah, so, that's awesome. Why don't we checks for any questions here. Okay. Martin from
Mhm.
Germany says hello. Hey, Martin, how's it going? Good to see you here. Um, yeah. So why don't we dive in now and actually show people, how easy this can be. And like I said, this is in my mind, this is the mind blowing piece of this is it's you make installing an environment, whether it's a simple one or a complicated one, we have made it at PM Square like just a couple steps and filling out a simple form, basically, is the way I would describe it to someone who had no context. Now, there's a lot of work that goes in up front, right? And we've done a lot of that work, and this is something we provide to our clients who work with us on these projects. But Chris, let's show them just how easy it is. Like, I want to create a new single instance Cognos server. How can I go about doing that using the techniques you've developed?
Sure. So I'll do a quick, very quick walkthrough of S3 and what some of these mentioned repositories look like. So these are the two buckets that we have that we previously mentioned, one containing the CloudFormation templates and the other one containing the Cognos specific information. So if we look in here, um, these are the subfolders that I've created, and I've tried to organize it in a couple ways. One that is, resources that are environment specific, and then, assets or resources that are um, environment agnostic, things like drivers, assuming your drivers are going to be consistent across all your environments. That can be here. That's something to be pulled regardless. Doesn't need to be tied to a specific environment. This user data. So this is the actual install scripts. So for dispatchers or single server installs, those can be housed here because again, you install the dispatcher, whether it's in dev, QA, prod, going to be the same. Most likely. If it's not, that's okay. You can just have an extra script housed in here. So this is just how I've created it. It may work for you, it may not. Good thing here, this can be fully customized depending on workflows within your own company. And then the templates are housed here. So here I've just broken up into the different flavors of install that we'll be doing, whether it's distributed or a single server. And so for here, we're going to do this version 3 stack. The first thing we need to do is grab this object URL. So CloudFormation knows where to pull that template from. And now we can make our new stack. So here we're in CloudFormation. You can see here's all the stacks we've created in this environment. And the stack is, just quickly while we make this, stack is just a collection of resources that CloudFormation ends up creating for you. Here we have a few options you can see. We can use one that's already ready, which we will do, dropping that in. But you can create your own. They have a great web interface designer that actually is virtual or is visual, so you can do drag and drop. You can also, if you're familiar with JSON or YAML, which is the two formats that CloudFormation supports, you can just go in and start coding your own. Also, for anyone that is unfamiliar and maybe a little hesitant, I have very little programming background experience. When I started this, and I still consider myself quite a novice, but AWS has a lot of what they call snippets, example code that they provide for all of their services. So if you think, okay, how do I create a DNS entry for application load balancer? Most likely you can find that whether directly from AWS or from someone's blog or website that they have. So we're going through, and now we're creating the stack, and we're providing the stack details. And you can see here we have a number of parameters. So the stacks can be created to be parameterized and support parameters, which definitely recommend doing. So we'll walk through each of these to see what this will look like. So first we'll give it a name. So we're just gonna say this is the Cognos sandbox. And then the environment name. So you see here we have the parameter that we need, and then we also have a little description of what that is. And then again, this can all be customized. This is simply what made sense to my brain, what I thought would be helpful. If there's different workflows, like I mentioned before, different workflows, different patterns, different needs, all this can be customized and configured to what makes sense for your team and your company. So for here, I'll say this is Cog Sandbox. So this environment name, what I'm using this for is actually, so you see here, it's used in tagging resources. this is really critical within an AWS environment, properly tagging resources for a few reasons. One, so you can figure out where everything is. Like if we go over here to our EC2 console and we see all the instances that we have, got a whole bunch in here, right? Some of them running, some of them stop, some of them terminated. See, a lot of these are obviously Cognos specific, but you see the other one PA instance, but it can be messy. So if you have a dedicated AWS account, even that is just for Cognos, you may have prod deployed in there, QA, dev. If you're wanting to isolate resources, it's good to isolate that. Now we can easily say, okay, what are our prod resources? And we can filter on that right away, right? If we come down here to the tagging, we can see what that looks like. You know, we're tagging the Cognos version, tagging the tier that it's in, so this is content manager. Is there anything to make your life easier to help you audit and track this? Another thing that tagging is really critical for is cost monitoring. So you can see, okay, what are all my tagged prod resources? And you quickly see what prod is costing you versus dev or QA.
Yeah, I can say from firsthand experience with Thrive, you know, when we first developed Thrive, we didn't apply the appropriate tagging structure to it, and so it was really hard to figure out, you know, our Thrive resources. So, I mean, for those of you who don't know, Thrive runs on Amazon Web Services, right? And so for our Thrive resources, we didn't have a good way of telling, like, well, how much, you know, what's our run rate on our cloud spend for Thrive? Once we put the tags in place, it became really easy. It was easy to develop reports and all of that to be able to say, yeah, this is how much Thrive as a whole is costing to run, and then each component of it over time. Critical, I would agree. We did have a question from Sanish, who wants to know, and Chris, I don't know, I kind of know the answer to this. I don't know if you know more than I do, but do you know if licensing gets impacted when using AWS? So maybe I'll say what I know, and then you can layer on if you know more than that, which is, so for PVU license, and they're PVU based. So for named user licensing, if you're a named user customer, the answer is no. Right? You can deploy as much hardware as you want on named user licensing with Cognos, and you can deploy it where you want. You don't have to worry about it. For PVU-based licensing, it does get trickier because obviously the thing about the cloud is it's a little harder to guarantee, you know, what, this is exactly where I'm going. It's a little harder to guarantee what you know, exact hardware configurations you use. So there's two layers of this. One, IBM has a really nice license, or Amazon has a really nice license manager, right? That allows you to say, to put in the parameters of, you know, how much hardware you're allowed to use. And then they will basically guarantee that you won't exceed that, okay? So the first layer there is like, yeah, it's really pretty simple in AWS to say, I want to configure so that I don't blow past my PVU caps, okay? Now, the second layer to that where it gets more challenging is IBM is going to require you to have ILMT installed. And we have been working with them to try to get them to recognize AWS Licensing Manager as an alternative to ILMT. Now, if you're a PVU customer, you know, you're supposed to have ILMT installed anyway, so hopefully you do. If you don't, when audit time rolls around, as it inevitably will, you know, IBM's going to have some questions for you. And if you have ever installed and maintained ILMT, you know that it's kind of painful. So that's why we are trying to get IBM to recognize this license manager. But that's my understanding of how all this works. Now, Chris, did I miss anything there?
Nope, that's completely right. One caveat though, if you do want to adopt this, if you're not in a new AWS deployment and you're looking to, you really can't back into it. So it works, and it actually works really well. But if you already have resources provisioned, and you want to try to apply this license manager, you can't do that. You have to. It will only count, you know, once you set up your licensing management scheme. It'll be upon new resources that are created with a specific AMI type. Gotcha. So it's one caveat. You clearly can't back into it. But you know, moving forward, you know, if you're looking to upgrade to 11.2 and you want to start, then that'd be a good time. You can point those. You can point license manager to those new instances.
Yeah, Sanish, that was a great question. Thank you. And keep them coming, guys. If you have any others, we're happy to answer them.
Yeah. So we'll jump back into this CloudFormation so we can get it kicked off. I'd like to want to make sure it can complete before before we sign off. So
Yeah,
yeah, these first three are just
we're
tagging
starting to
in.
run a little
Yeah,
low on time here. So
these first three are just metadata tagging. We went through that. We're not going to do it now. This is just a simple single server install, but you could easily drop in, the Cognos gateway URL you want to use, and have it automatically configure with IIS or the right alias, etc. Here, we're pointing to the bucket where our installation media is, defining the VPC where we want to deploy to. Same with subnets, if you want to deploy in a particular subnet. Key pair name, so we can RDP, and then obviously the location of our RDP source, and then configure or server configuration, so how large we want our server to be, and then the AMI we're using, which again, that AMI is that machine image that has Cognos already pre-installed. So we're just going to quickly run through the rest.
And just so everybody understands while we're running through this, now this is not like if you go to deploy Cognos on AWS, like this is not these screens we're showing you and templates you can fill out. This is not something Amazon built, right? This is something that we've created here at PM Square.
Yeah, that's right. If you want to just deploy on AWS, you can absolutely just go into EC2, launch new instances, and do it like you would now. Download the Cognos install media to those instances, spin them up, configure it manually.
And what we're watching right now, like Cognos is being installed on a new EC2 instance live, right, as we speak.
Well, this is a bit. So right now, it's again the CloudFormation. There's the two-tiered stuff, two layers here that we're running on. The CloudFormation templates are provisioning the Amazon resources. So you can see here, the IAM profile. So the EC2 instance can speak with S3, security groups, security ingress rules, SSM, the security, the system manager document, so it can join the domain, which always takes a little bit of time to create. So this is just the AWS infrastructure and resources that are being provisioned at the moment. Once the EC2 instance starts, should start in a minute, that's when you're actually going to see Cognos start to get installed. So when you launch an EC2 instance, you can run what is called user data. Let me see here. Let's forget where it is. I think it's under settings. Yep. Edit user data. So see here. So this is actually the user data that was executed when this instance. And we'll take a look at this in detail. But what this allows you is you can pass through batch or command line commands, PowerShell commands. If you're Linux, you can pass a bash script through. And what this will then do is it will execute on the start of the instance. So in this case, this is the method that we're going to be using to actually configure and install Cognos. So yeah, CloudFormation provisions the resources, and then we leverage EC2 user data with PowerShell to install and configure Cognos. There we go, the instances is being generated. So we'll just let this run in the background, but what we'll do now is we'll take a look at some of these templates and scripts, how they look. You can get a feel for what was done and how a lot of this was stitched together. So first, we'll just take a look at the CloudFormation template, which is here. So there are a number of different layers to this template. We won't dive into detail of them all, but here you can see how the parameters are formed. So this, again, this was CloudFormation supports JSON or YAML. This is written in YAML. And a lot of this will look familiar to what we just saw on the prompt screen. These are the parameters that we've defined. Here we've set defaults. You can set defaults or not. Some of this can be hard-coded if you want users to be forced to use a particular parameter, for example. But here under resources, this is where we're actually getting into the resource provisioning. This is where we're calling, if we do that. So, for, let's look at the instance. I think it's what everyone will be most familiar with. So Cognos instance. So that's the object that we're creating. The type is an EC2 instance. And then we're defining just those properties about the instance. So what security group to use. In this case, where it's the one we just made above, that has all the, you can see here, has inbound important 9300, for example. Attaching the IAM profile, attaching everything we've already defined above to this instance that's needed for it. But if we hit here, this is that user data we said. So this is that script that will execute when the instance starts. And this is the key component, because now this is when we take over to actually configuring Cognos. You see, it's not a big script because we've little cloak and dagger here. We're actually just calling another script. And the reason for that is, if you look here on this left, you see we have to number the different rows, and we have to wrap everything in brackets and drop in a vertical line with percent sign. So when you run it through PowerShell in CloudFormation, this is the syntax that you have to do to get it to execute. You have to wrap every row of PowerShell in the syntax. And some of the scripts that we have can be close to 200 lines. So, to be honest, I don't want to have to go through 200 lines and wrap that in all these brackets and all this code. So what we ended up just referencing it and downloading that script here, and then executing the script. And it actually proved to be much better, aside from me not wanting to go through the exercise of doing that. What I'm able to do is I can update this configuration script whenever I need to, and then just dump that back out to S3. And then when I rerun it, that new script just gets picked up. I'm not having to come in here to my template every time and edit lines, make sure the lines get set, make sure I'm not missing a bracket. It's almost cleaner and easier to maintain and update. I'm just dropping that out on the S3 repository and having it get picked up in that method. Just closing out, here is where, then just below the user data, this is where we're doing the tagging. So, again, we mentioned the importance of tagging. This is what allows it to be hard coded, where users aren't forgetting it. It just gets tagged. They just have to make sure they added the right inputs, or you can hard code the inputs. Actually, that's what I did here. So this is our schedule to stop instances every day that aren't needed to run at night. So I don't want to forget that for these, especially since these are just sandbox instances. So I have that schedule automatically get applied. So it'll always get shut down, even if I forget to turn it off. So there's that. Now, just really quick, want to jump through the cog config install script that we were referencing. So this is the PowerShell script that is actually doing the install of Cognos right now on that new sandbox that we had. And you see here, a lot of this will be familiar. We're defining where we want to, where we're downloading from S3, where we were dropping our drivers. We parameterize that and dropping that out here. Here is the parameters for report mode, the dispatcher size. All this is parameterized. And so this is something that you could parameterize, you could hard code. It just depends on what your workflow is. You can see here for the audit database, we have our audit information.
Yeah, see, what I love about this, just the amount of time I have spent looking at, I've got 3 remote desktops open, and I've got Cognos configuration open in all 3 of them, and I'm just like, okay, what is different here? Because one of these is wrong, but I don't know which one, or comparing them in Notepad++ or something like that. So, what, if I could boil it down, at least my understanding of it here is like basically you're all of the configuration steps you actually take when you install Cognos in cogconfig are all being generated by this file. And so, I could reuse this file if I have 100 application servers to install. Just this one file or PowerShell script is going to be able to configure all 100 of them for me. Is that accurate?
Yes, potentially. There are always caveats, but yeah, that would be the idea. Yes.
See, that's I love it. Okay, keep going. Sorry.
No, it's okay. We're running up on there, so I want to just jump through. So, these are all being parameterized, and all we're doing here to actually configure Cognos is we have parameterized a cog startup file. So all of the key areas you about the log book, the VM size, report mode, the dispatcher URL, so the machine name or the host name for that, gateway information. We've created parameters for all those and the correct block of code within that cog startup file. And then here, we're just doing a big find and replace. That's it. I mean, I say that's it. Obviously, there was quite a few steps to get to this, but that's essentially what we're doing. So we're updating that cog startup file, and then once it's been updated, you can see here we're saving the configuration, and then we're starting the service.
Yep. One little thing in this that I love is how you turn off and then turn back on Windows Defender through this script. I mean, it's a little thing like that could really trip you up. If you know, like if I were coming in here, I don't know how long it would take me to think, oh yeah, I need to put that in my PowerShell script. But it's the little touches.
Here, and also configuring firewall rules. So I've mentioned, I think at the top, like I've forgotten to open these many times. It becomes a headache, but now you can just do it, just define it to do it once, and it'll always be there, opened up for you.
That's awesome.
So pause there. I don't know if there are any questions in chat.
No, nothing right now. We can keep going.
Okay.
Then we can, we can run for another 10 or 15 minutes. So don't worry about it.
Okay, we'll try to get through this. So the other one we mentioned, if we go back to original architecture, we talked about multi-AZ, being able to recover from a disaster in a particular availability zone. So I mentioned that we deployed this. So we have run this deployment. We didn't do it live because it can take a little over 45 minutes to run, but you do get all of this. So it's quite a bit of architecture infrastructure to be deployed in just that time. We took a different approach. So for this single server stack that we built, you looked, it was just a single CloudFormation template. For this larger deployment, we used a different method, and we used nested stacks. So this is the larger deployment. You see here, we have a security group stack, we have a dispatcher stack, web stack, CM stack. What this is doing is we have a single root stack that is then referencing other CloudFormation templates to build it. So a lot there. But what this allows you to do is basically create a modular approach to your templates. So you have your dispatcher template that can be used to create your dispatchers. You could reference that across different environment types. If prod is similar to the architecture that we're looking at, there's more multi-tiered, but maybe dev is just a content manager dispatcher. Well, you could just reuse that same dispatcher stack to deploy that single server dispatcher versus having to do something different. So the modularity is important. Also, there is a lot of resources here you can see. And even within these stacks, there are a lot of resources within them that are being created. Having a single monolithic stack is against Amazon best practices. They advise against that. Just trying to code and maintain that is really challenging and debug. So this allows you to break it up, like I said, be modular, smaller, take smaller pieces of, smaller bites of the apple, if you're not having to have everything all in one large stack. So that's what this is, and you can see here all the different nested stacks that were created to provision this. Then if you look over here, we already took a peek at this, but this is what the deployment looks like. So here we look at, we tagged it as prod, so it's labeled as prod. So we have our dispatchers and content managers and our gateways. Oh, one more thing I wanted to show. The output for this, and this is again that repeatability, predictability, allow people to get in and get the information they need. We go to outputs. We actually output the Cognos gateway URL here. So once this is done, there's no guessing, especially if this is like a new environment for 11.2, just a sandbox you spun up. I'm sure we've all done this, wasted 5-10 minutes every time. You got to go back into cog config, wait for it to open, grab the URL, paste it in. Well, now we just have it
every time. I do that every time.
Everyone does. I always forget. Well, there we go.
Look at that.
and we're in.
And so
Now, the
now
failover.
the actual
Oh,
act of
right.
spinning up an environment like this, like here we've got what, 2 dispatchers, 2 content managers, and 2 gateways. So it's basically the diagram that you showed earlier.
Mhm.
Is configuring this environment? I mean, obviously there's a lot more work that went in setting up all the scripts and everything that you've walked us through so far, but the actual act of creating this environment, is it significantly different from what we saw for just spinning up a single server environment? Or is it basically just, again, to dramatically simplify it, filling out a form?
It was form based, yes.
Yeah, it's just filling
Yeah,
out a
it was.
form.
There was more. You had to define the like instance information for the additional tiers for the gateway and the content manager, for
Sure.
example. There's other additional things that we'll talk about in a minute. Defining the availability zones that you're deploying to. There was more to the form, but yeah, I used the same methodology for deploying this.
And I think that gets to the heart of why we decided we had to do this live stream was because a lot of you watching right now have done this where you've built an environment like this or larger, and it's a heck of a lot harder than filling out a form. And so that really cuts to the core of it, and why we got so pumped about doing this. Anyway, go ahead, Chris.
Mm-hmm. No, one of the areas I wanted to pivot to next is what we hit on at the top of the hour and with the architecture is that resiliency component and the failover and building that in natively to your architecture, not have it be an afterthought of just there's that other data center that we've got some stuff maybe that's up to date or not. So that's what we'll look at here. So we have our servers. Here's our availability zone. So you can see here, the servers all tagged as 1 are in availability zone 1A, and then 2 is 1B. So we are multi-AZ. We're across USD1A and 1B. What that allows us to do is we will keep Cognos up. So we are logged in. We're going to do a real life fire drill. So we're just going to shut off everything in USD 1B, or I'm sorry, 1A.
So here we're losing 1 content manager, 1 dispatcher, and 1 gateway. This is simulating like a data center goes offline.
Yeah, this is remember, availability zone is basically a data center. So we are losing a data center, and we're losing our primary content manager on top of that.
Woo, okay, that's scary.
Now, you will see some funniness because we're losing the primary content manager, right? So the same methods would apply if it went down and even if everything was deployed in a single data center on-prem, there's going to be some funny, yep. Okay, this gets a little... Yeah. See, there's a little funniness, but it's going to pick back up in a second. Well, of course it won't now.
And so
what is the demo life, right?
Well, tell me about it. But so, I mean, this is one of those things where, you don't have to have, like a lot of my clients. So we have really big multinational clients who of course, they have data centers all over the world and it's easy to have DR, right? We have other clients where it's like, the data center's in the basement of corporate HQ. And where's the other data center? There isn't one, So this kind of is allows you to simulate the not just having a separate environment that it cuts over to, but really having a single environment that is able to maintain uptime if something happens in a data center, an individual data center, because the environment is spread across data centers. Now, like you said, demo, right? This is, all the demo caveats apply. We swear you guys this worked last time we tested it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I would expect it to come back online in a second now. In any case, the proof, the proof of concept is there, and we've seen this in action work. It's curious that it's not functioning right now. Well, let's let it run for a sec and come back to it. I wouldn't get too hung up on it.
But so that, as you said, that's the core concept there. being able to lose an AZ. Now, the one, taking one step further, we mentioned that this is running an RDS, so the Relational Database Service, which is the managed database service from Amazon. This, for our RDS instance here, is not multi-AZ. You can deploy those in multi-AZ as well. So you can have the full, as we saw in the diagram, we can have the full multi-AZ deployment across app tier and database tier. What we've done with some of the testing I've done with that, the failover can take about 45 minutes, or 45 seconds for that to cut over. And when I was working, it still got a little funniness. If you just lost the database, saw some things where, you'd have to, if you were navigating, you'd have to reload the page. If you were in the middle of editing something, you may have lost work if the database hadn't synced right away. But it was still up and running.
Let me ask you this.
That's really the key.
This is one question I also sometimes get. So let's imagine I'm a large multinational, and I've got offices in Zurich and Tokyo and Chicago. Could I have a single Cognos environment where I have application servers or dispatchers located in say the Frankfurt AZ and US East, and I'm assuming there's one in Japan. I couldn't say exactly where it is, but there's got to be, right? Where I have that located in all of those, I have dispatchers like located in data centers near my large corporate offices, but it's just a single Cognos environment.
Theoretically, yes.
Yeah.
So
I think we'd have routing rules or something. I think routing rules. We'd set up routing rules to route them to the relevant.
So you don't need routing rules. So there are a few things to consider there. The one would be like latency between application components talking to each other. See here, we're back up here. I wonder if it was a caching issue or something. So it came back up a little quicker on my side. Yeah. So could you do that? Yes. That would take quite the effort. The thing there is you need to make sure that the connectivity between all the app tiers would be sufficient to communicate.
Right.
Because the thing with Cognos, we're deploying Cognos in this way is a little tricky. Is you can only have one content manager, and that even if the dispatcher may be somewhere else, and maybe that's needed, the content manager would still need to be, in the stateside, even if Japan has the dispatcher tiers. It's not something we've tested. Just definitely do it. If you're interested to try that deployment, that sounds fun. So yeah, and that's also the benefit of going to AWS. One of the next step, or higher level benefits is you're multi-region by default. You want to go and deploy in Tokyo?
There it is.
You can just deploy in Tokyo. We're there. We can do it.
It is so
cool. And the really neat thing is, for any of those clients that might be on, we have the scripts to build that. We can just rerun all those scripts in a different region and have a new environment. So again, predictability, repeatability, but that time saving is key.
Well, cool. Hey, so we're about 10 minutes past the hour. Were any key things you want to show at this point? It was probably a caching issue. I've noticed I have that problem on my local machine a lot. But here you guys can see that environment took a little longer to come up than maybe we had anticipated, but here it is. So Chris basically simulated a data center failure, and it's within a single environment. Cognos is still running. So very cool. Any final thoughts or things you want to share?
Just one little piece of advice, for anyone looking to do this, especially if you're coming from a more traditional IT team or BI team that has done the on-prem for years, and that's what you're familiar with. If you're looking to though move from that to a more DevOps approach, you can do two things. You can take your time. What I would say is take your time with it. Give yourself and your team room to breathe, room to fail, room to learn. Because as Ryan mentioned, at the top, there's a lot in AWS when you're trying to learn and trying to get in, and EC2, RDS, S3. There's a lot there. So take it one step at a time. Be very specific on what you're trying to do. Start small and expand from there. If you have a tighter time horizon, you can engage with PM Square. We're happy to help you get to, if you're wanting to get to that DevOps framework sooner, we can definitely help you get there sooner with, as we've seen today, a lot of the things that we've developed and best practices we've built around that.
Yeah, I think in that vein, I would point out to everybody, I just shared on the screen, we actually do now have a listing on the Amazon AWS Marketplace for Cognos Cloud Migration and Managed Services. So if what you saw today was interesting, it's something that you think you could bring into your organization if you want, single environment DR, or if you're interested in, quick and easy deployments by filling out a form instead of like scheduling a week of some admin's time to go and do installs and configs. That's something we can help you with. We can help you get that set up and make the migration to AWS, and then we can manage it through our managed services program going forward, which is a pretty affordable option for customers who want to engage with us to help run Cognos, keep Cognos healthy and updated, and all the bugs fixed and all that sort of good stuff. So that's something that that we can do here. If you just go to the AWS Marketplace and search Cognos, that's probably the easiest way to find this. Go to the AWS Marketplace, search Cognos. It's the first listing you're going to get. So it's we're really proud of it and proud of the work that Chris has done to help put this together. So do check it out. Reach out to us if you have any questions about this. We're always happy to engage with you and see what we can do to get you moving in this direction. I think it's important work that we're doing, both at PM Square, but as a community, to start thinking about how can we move Cognos towards these types of architectures to have it just be a more modern platform to deliver the types of end user experiences that people expect, while making it much easier on ourselves as Cognos professionals who are in charge of, keeping the ship sailing. So with that said, I want to give a big thanks to you, Chris, for coming on board here and sharing this with us. Like I think multiple times I went like this, which is usually the sign I did the mind blown. My mind is being blown, which is usually the sign that I'm impressed with something. And I really am impressed with the work you did here. I think you've done a great job. I know our customers are going to get a lot out of it. So I want to thank you for coming on and sharing all of your knowledge with us here today.
Thanks for having me. It was great.
All right. Well, with that, we are going to sign off. So I want to thank you all for coming to another PM Square live stream. Stick with us. We've got some more topics coming up. We'll have more Cognos topics. We're going to be doing a live stream on Incorda, which is a very interesting kind of bleeding edge BI tool that we think you need to be aware of. If you have questions about deploying Cognos in AWS, reach out to me, reach out to Chris, connect with us on LinkedIn. I'm always on LinkedIn posting interesting stuff about Cognos or BI and analytics in general. So I'd love to connect with you there, and check us out at pmsquare.com. So until next time, I want to thank you for coming today. We really appreciate it, and stay safe out there, and we'll see you soon. Bye.